Hey everyone, welcome to Intro to DJing, and what I want to do in this video is give you a quick overview of the Rekordbox software. It's a little bit complicated of an interface, but that's because there are a lot of cool features, so I'll hopefully be able to walk you through some of the most important ones, and that way you can follow along in the rest of the course here. So down here in the bottom, we have our browser, which allows us to select songs. And here on the left, we have a tab that allows us to go through our playlists and overall collection. This is also useful for exporting playlists to your USB sticks, which is important if you're trying to play on CDJs. You can open this up to even see your different devices here on the left, which is pretty nice. But usually I keep this tag closed. You can also drag playlists from here into your favorites, which are basically right now they're all blank, but you can drag any four that you would like and you can keep those up there. You can even sort the ones that you have as your favorites, which is really cool. And a playlist is just a collection of songs that you've created in a specific order. So to load a track to either deck, you can simply click and drag the track and load it to that deck. And as you can see, now I have a track in this deck, deck 1, and I have a track in deck number 2. Depending on the view you have, you're either going to have horizontal waveforms or vertical waveforms. And if you're really tricky, you can go from 2 decks to 4 decks, but for now we're just going to focus on 2 decks like this. I prefer this 2-deck horizontal mode. You also have these general overviews, whether you're trying to do, export your music to CDJs or you're trying to do lighting. Honestly, performance view is the one you're going to be using if you're actually using Rekordbox to DJ as a DJ software, so we're going to keep it there for now. Let's look at each of these deck controls. Notice how these are mirrored across deck 1 and deck 2. So the first thing to note is we have this set of 8 pads. This will correspond to the 8 pads that are generally present on your controller. And if your controller has a pad select button like the DJFriendZone or pretty much every DJ controller for Rekordbox, you can select that mode here, or you can press the button on your controller that will select between these different ones. So for instance, by default, it's set to hotcue, and I find that to be perhaps one of the most useful, where you can jump around to certain sections of your track. But if you want to see, for instance, the beat jump controls, you can go down to the beat jump section as well. For now, I'm going to return this back to hotcue. This other tab down here will actually let you adjust the beat grid. I have a separate video on setting beat grids, both static beat grids and also beat grids that change over time in Rekordbox. So that control is down here. But once again, once you've prepared your music, you probably won't be doing this live. Hopefully you won't have to be setting your beat grids live. Moving on over, we have our loop controls. This will set an auto loop given the number of beats. So you can basically select the loop size and click on this button to engage it. And you can also adjust it while the loop is playing. And if you want to turn it off, you just simply click the button. Over here, we have our loop in and out controls, which unlike the auto loop, you actually click the in button to start where the loop will return to, and then the out button will jump back. So if I'm playing, start the in button, and then I click the out button. And when I want to leave the loop, I just hit the exit button down there. Moving over here, we have our standard play pause button. Start and stop the track, really important. Our cue button, which is set to cue stutter, which will basically play the track as long as the cue button is held down, and when it's released, it'll jump back. You want to be very careful of pressing this while a track is playing, because if the track is playing, it'll jump back and stop the track. So this is typically used for starting to mix in the track, and from there, you'll probably want to leave it alone. You get your master tempo button. I talked a little bit about this before, but this maintains the pitch of your track while you're adjusting the tempo. Your quantize control, which controls whether or not it'll snap to the nearest beat or whatever your quantize setting is when you're jumping around cue points. We'll talk about that later too. Perhaps what's most important is tempo adjustment, which you can do by clicking and dragging this, basically this middle platter here controls the adjustment of the tempo. And you can of course set how wide you want the adjustment to be by clicking on the plus minus button. So plus minus 10% is pretty standard, but of course you can adjust it to 16 or even wide, which is really wild. Lets you really go crazy with it. By double clicking, you can also enter the tempo you want, which is very nice. You also have your slip mode, which means basically while the track is playing, if you do any scratching or cue jumping, as soon as you're done doing that stuff, it'll jump back to where the track was playing before, so you don't have to worry about losing your place. Pretty helpful feature as well. And then over here you have your needle. Now this is showing the overall waveform of the track. That's a zoomed in version up here. To show you this, I can of course zoom out here and you can kind of see, well, mirrors it a little bit. So that's pretty helpful. And you can do what's called a needle drop, which is just simply clicking and dragging around the track. The other thing that's worth mentioning, you have your sync control here, whether you have it on or off. And if your sync control is on, one of your decks is going to be the master deck, which the other one is synced to. So typically, if you're playing one song on one deck, that'll be the master. And then when you stop playing that track, the next deck will become the master. So when you load a new song, that one becomes synced to the other master. So the master is usually the one that is been playing the longest in most of the cases. And under here, you have your lighting view as well. Now, one of the things I really want to mention is you have these controls here at the top that are really important to see when you're adjusting different things on your controller when DJing live. The first is this effects panel, which allows you to select which effects are applied or on. So you can either have them as a single effect or as a group where you can have 3. And you can actually choose which decks you're assigning this to as well, whether decks 1, 2, 3, and 4, the sampler, or the master channel. I typically like having FX1 applied to deck 1 and FX2 applied to deck 2, but you can of course decide how you like doing this. You also have your Mixpoint Link control, which what this allows you to do is set mix in and mix out points. And if Mixpoint Link is on, what will happen is when one track reaches its mix out point, the next track will start from its mix in point. So you can kind of have these auto transitions happening for you. However, I would say be careful about this because if you do have Mixpoint Link on and you're playing a track that has a mix out point, you don't want the other track to all of a sudden start at a different point, especially if you're trying to mix it in. So just be aware of that and be careful. I used to use it a lot and I don't really use it that much anymore. I tend to know what I'm doing. I tend to use these cue points and just basically name them. You also have your sampler. This allows you to basically load up individual samples like snares and stuff that can be triggered with these pads. You can change the pad mode here to sampler if you would like. That's often also present on most controllers. What's really important to note here is you have this mixer control, which will also show things like the crossfader, which blends between the two tracks, your headphone cue level, your individual up faders, and then your low, mid, and high filter knobs, as well as which tracks are being cued by the headphone cue, plus your overall trim knob. So if you want to see these controls or you're mixing entirely with software, you're going to definitely want to have this mixer section on. Over here, we also have the record. So if you want to record your mixes live, you can have that enabled. And then lastly, you have your lighting panel, which can control lighting via DMX. So if you're running lights in addition, you can kind of see this is typically what's going on here at these different scenes in the track, but you can also override them here in the lighting panel. I tend to use separate lighting software, so I don't do that too much, but that's a nice feature. And lastly, you have your Ableton link button up here. So this is a quick overview of Rekordbox. When I say, we're going to open up the effects panel, I'm going to assume you know where this is and when I click on it. So hopefully this gives you an overview of what the software is like, and in later videos, we'll go into more detail here. See you in the next video.